Coming up, another episode of The Deep Dive, exploring radical ideas. A podcast produced by Bob Rash.
That delivers a logical analysis of objective reality, grounded in rational principles. We will explore relevant facts and radical ideas based on the axiomatic principles of identity, causality, and consciousness, on reason as an absolute, on rational self-interest as a moral guide, and on the ideals of privacy, freedom, and justice.
When you see that trade is done, not by consent, but by compulsion, when you see that in order to produce, you need to get permission from men who produce nothing, then you may know that your society is doomed.
Wow. That's quite a quote to start with from Ayn Rand herself.
Straight from the material we're looking at today, yeah.
Yep.
It definitely sets a tone.
It certainly does. Very provocative.
Absolutely. And welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. Today we are plunging into the world of Ayn Rand. She's a figure who still sparks intense debate decades after her death. Novelist, philosopher.
And for some, a heroine, as one of our sources calls her.
Exactly. And this deep dive, it's built specifically for you, based on the sources you sent over. We've got a text called Heroina by Bob Rash. That's pronounced Bob Rash.
You're right, Rash. And also excerpts from O Minimo Sobre Ayn Rand by Roberta Rachevsky, pronounced Rashevsky.
Rachevsky, got it. So our mission today is really to unpack these specific sources. We'll trace the arc of her pretty incredible life, dig into the core ideas of her philosophy, which she called objectivism, and look at how these materials address some of the common criticisms you hear about her. Think of it as your shortcut to understanding Rand, strictly through the lens of these texts.
It's quite a journey. I mean, her life was swept up in massive historical events, and her philosophy, it really challenges a lot of standard assumptions. Should be interesting to see what these specific sources emphasize.
Okay, let's dive in, starting, as you said, with that journey. The sources take us right back to the beginning. St. Petersburg, Tsarist Russia, 1905.
Alisa Zinovieva Rosenbaum, that was her birth name.
And the picture painted is of a really intellectually curious young girl, right? A big reader.
Oh, yeah. Voracious, apparently. The sources mention Les Miserables, Cyrano de Bergerac. You can kind of see hints of her later focus there, strong individuals, moral drama.
And she wasn't just reading about drama, she lived through it. She saw the end of the Tsarist regime.
And then, bam, the Communist Revolution. That hit her family directly, their pharmacy confiscated by the state.
That must have been formative, losing your property like that.
Absolutely. The sources make it clear that this experience was fundamental. They had to flee to Crimea for a while.
Hoping things would be different there.
Yeah, with the anti-communists. But then the communists took Crimea too, so they had to go back to Leningrad, St. Petersburg's new name. That direct clash with collectivism, with state power, it left a deep, deep mark.
Yet she still managed to get an education.
Amazingly, yes. Studied philosophy, history, even cinema at the university there. But things were getting worse.
How so?
The sources mention the threat of being deported to Siberia. That was a real danger for intellectuals or anyone seen as bourgeois. So by 1926, she was 21. She knew she had to get out.
And she made it to America.
Yes. And the sources portray her arrival in New York as this incredibly powerful, almost symbolic moment. Seeing the Statue of Liberty, the Manhattan skyline.
She saw it as, what was the phrase? A monument to the rational, heroic man.
Exactly. And changing her name at Ellis Island to Ayn Rand, the sources frame that as a very deliberate act, like bringing her ships, leaving that past completely behind, no turning back.
Her big dream then was Hollywood, right? Screenwriting.
That was it, headed west. And there's that famous anecdote, which the sources include, about her just walking up to the Paramount Gate.
And running into Cecil B. DeMille. Just like that.
Pretty much. Introduced herself, he saw something in her, gave her a job as an extra on King of Kings. Pure determination.
And that's where she met her husband, Frank O'Connor.
That's right. But success didn't come instantly. The sources point out she had tough times, too, like working as a waitress during the Depression.
Sold her first screenplay, Red Pawn, but it wasn't produced.
Right. But her play, Night of January 16th, did get produced, so there were steps forward, but definitely struggles.
It feels like the sources really emphasize these three distinct periods. Tsarist Russia, then the really harsh Soviet experience.
Yeah, the oppression, the confiscations, fleeing, returning, that cemented her absolute rejection of collectivism and statism.
And then America, where she could finally pursue her own goals, find love, eventually achieve fame and fortune.
Exactly. And that persistence, pushing through those early Hollywood difficulties, it really foreshadows the virtues like productivity and independence that she later championed in her philosophy.
So those intense experiences, especially escaping Soviet Russia, clearly fueled the ideas she started putting into her novels.
No doubt. Her fiction became the first real outlet for her developing worldview.
The Living was the first one, 1934.
Yes, and it draws very heavily on her life back in Soviet Russia. The central theme is that individuals struggle for freedom against the demands of the state, the collective.
And that story about the Italian film version, Noi Vivi, that's wild.
Isn't it? Mussolini liked it at first because, well, it slammed Stalin, but then they realized it was also a critique of fascism because, for Rand, both were just forms of collectivism, so they banned it.
But a producer saved the reels.
He did, and Rand herself re-edited it years later. The sources note that while the character Kira is inspired by her experiences, it's not a strict autobiography, more like using her life as raw material.
Then came Anthem in 1936. Shorter, more like a novella.
Right, a sci-fi piece depicting this totally collectivist future where even the word I is forbidden, only we. It's chilling.
And The Fountainhead in 43, that's the one that really broke through, wasn't it, set in New York?
Yeah, huge bestseller. It explored the conflict she saw within American society itself. And the movie adaptation with Gary Cooper as Howard Rourke, very successful.
The sources mention it was titled Tempestade nos Corações in Brazil. And her play, Night of January 16th, was also produced there. Seems she had an early international reach.
She did, but according to these sources, the real culmination, her magnum opus, is Atlas Shrugged, 1957.
This is where objectivism, her philosophy, is fully fleshed out within the story.
That's how the sources present it, yes. The plot itself is epic. Society collapsing because its creators, its producers start disappearing.
Going on strike, essentially.
Exactly, a strike against a system that, in the book, punishes achievement and rewards what she saw as parasitism and coercion.
So the core conflict is the producers versus the takers, those who create versus those who use force or favors.
Pretty much. The sources frame it as the rationally self-interested creators versus those who rely on political pull, regulations, basically government force, to get what they haven't earned. It's portrayed as a stark warning about replacing free markets and property rights with central planning.
And the title itself, Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah.
The original idea was the strike.
Yeah. But her husband, Frank O'Connor, suggested Atlas Shrugged. Much more evocative.
The idea being Atlas carrying the world.
Representing the producers carrying society. And the title asks, what happens when they shrug, when they refuse to carry that burden under unfair conditions?
Its impact was massive. The sources bring up that Library of Congress poll.
Right, ranking it as one of the most influential books in the U.S., second only to the Bible for many respondents at the time. That's significant influence.
So, after laying out these ideas so forcefully in fiction, she then moved more into explicit philosophical writing.
Yes, Atlas Shrugged really positioned her as a philosopher in the public eye. She then began formally articulating objectivism as a complete system.
A philosophy for living on Earth, she called it.
Exactly. And the name, objectivism, is key. The sources stress it's because knowledge and values come from objective reality, and the tool for discovering them is reason.
Okay, so let's break down objectivism as these sources present it. It has different branches, like any philosophy. starting with the foundation. Metaphysics. What is real?
Right, the basics. It starts with what she considered self-evident axioms. First, existence exists. You can't deny it without proving it because you have to exist to deny existence.
Okay, makes sense.
Second, A is A, the law of identity. Everything is what it is. A thing has a specific nature. And the sources explain that causality, cause and effect, follows directly from this. Things act according to their nature.
And the third axiom.
Consciousness, the faculty of perceiving that which exists. But, as the quote from Galt's speech emphasizes, consciousness needs something outside itself to be conscious of. Consciousness, conscious of nothing, is impossible.
And building on that, the sources say objectivists are atheists.
Necessarily, according to this framework. Because there's no empirical evidence for supernatural beings, and based on the axioms, particularly existence exists, the universe itself must have always existed in some form. Something can't come from literally nothing.
Okay, so that's the what is. Next branch. Epistemology. How do we know?
This is all about reason. The sources state clearly, knowledge comes from sensory perception processed by logical reasoning, not revelation, not intuition, not innate ideas.
It's empirical and rational.
Yes. The texts frame it with questions like, do we gain knowledge through reason or faith? Can we achieve certainty or only doubt? Objectivism comes down firmly on the side of reason and the possibility of certainty through logic based on evidence.
Now, this is where that common criticism comes up, that objectivism is cold, emotionless. How do the sources handle that?
They push back strongly. They argue objectivism values emotions, but sees them as responses to your judgments and values. They're like automatic consequences of your deeper premises.
So not tools for understanding the world.
Exactly. Reason is the tool. Emotions tell you about yourself and your values, but not directly about external reality. Reason's job isn't to crush emotion, but to understand why you feel what you feel by examining the underlying thoughts and premises. It involves, as the sources say, both introspection, checking your own thinking, and extrospection, analyzing the world.
And this connects to free will.
Yes. Humans, unlike animals operating on instinct, have the choice to focus their minds, to think, or to evade thought. That choice, the sources emphasize, is the basis of free will, rejecting deterministic views.
And language is crucial here, too.
Absolutely. Language allows us to form concepts, to move from just perceiving things to understanding abstract principles. It's essential for conceptual knowledge.
All right, that's metaphysics and epistemology. Next, ethics. How should we live? The sources point to rational egoism.
Right. Or rational self-interest. The core idea presented here is that your own life is your highest moral value, and the purpose of morality is to guide you in living that life successfully.
So self-interest isn't inherently bad.
Not in this view. Rational self-interest means acting to sustain and enhance your own life, guided by reason and the facts of reality. The sources actually state that acting from self-interest isn't just ethical, it's existential, necessary for survival as a rational being.
And virtues. They aren't duties.
No, definitely not duties imposed from outside. They're presented as the choices and actions required to achieve your rational self-interest. The sources include a quote from Rand arguing that duty destroys morality because it disconnects actions from personal values and rational choice.
So what are these virtues?
The sources list 7 primary ones: rationality, the commitment to think and follow reason; honesty, refusing to fake reality; integrity, acting consistently with your rational values; independence, relying on your own judgment; productivity, creating the values your life requires; justice, judging others rationally and treating them as they deserve; and pride, moral ambition, striving to achieve your own moral perfection.
And the main vice?
Evasion, the refusal to think, to face facts. And self-abasement is also highlighted as profoundly immoral, rejecting your own value.
Okay, and there's a specific theory of value here too. Not intrinsic, not subjective, but objective.
Exactly, the objective theory of value. Value isn't just inherent in an object regardless of who's looking. And it's not just a purely subjective feeling or whim.
So what is that?
It's relational. Value arises from the relationship between an object or goal and a valuer, based on a rational assessment of the facts according to a standard. For objectivism, the ultimate standard is man's life. So something is valuable if it objectively serves the life of a rational being. It has to be discovered through reason, not just felt or decreed.
So ethics boils down to individualism.
Yeah.
Each person as an end in themselves.
That's the essence of it, according to these texts. You don't exist as a tool for others' purposes, and they don't exist for yours.
Which leads us logically into politics. How do we live together?
Right. Politics is just ethics applied to social interactions. And the sources are unequivocal. The only political system fully consistent with this ethic is laissez-faire capitalism.
Because it protects individual rights.
Precisely. Rights like life, liberty, property, the pursuit of happiness. These aren't gifts from government, the sources argue. They're requirements of human nature for survival in a social context. They protect individuals from physical force initiated by others.
So what is the government's job in this view?
Extremely limited. It's presented as an agency holding a monopoly on the retaliatory use of force, whose sole legitimate purpose is to protect individual rights. Basically, to keep violence out of human relationships so people can cooperate voluntarily.
Meaning, police, courts, and military.
That's it. Police to stop criminals domestically, courts to adjudicate disputes based on objective laws, and a military to defend against foreign aggression. Nothing more.
And the sources stress it absolutely cannot violate rights itself.
Correct. If it initiates force against peaceful citizens through excessive regulation, wealth redistribution, censorship, it stops being a protector and becomes, in the source's blunt terms, a mafia, a violator of rights itself. It must operate under the rule of law. Objective, clear laws protecting rights applied equally.
There's even mention of voluntary funding.
Yeah, a controversial point perhaps, but the sources touch on the idea that a proper government might be funded voluntarily, maybe through fees for services like contract arbitration, to ensure it truly operates by consent, not coercion, via taxes. And they also note it doesn't mean a total monopoly on forced self-defense is still a right.
Okay, one last branch. Aesthetics. The philosophy of art.
This is presented as the culmination, in a way. How do you take these abstract values and philosophical ideas and make them concrete, tangible, through art?
And the goal of art isn't just realism.
Not just portraying things as they are, but as they could be and should be. The sources mention Rand called her preferred style romantic realism realistic in technique, but focused on portraying the ideal, embodying values. It connects back to an Aristotelian idea mentioned, art showing the universal, the potential.
Her book, The Romantic Manifesto, delves into this.
Yes. And the sources give some examples of her tastes. Loved opera, particularly the melodies, disliked modern jazz and rock, didn't consider photography true art generally because it captures what is, but saw artistic merit in composition, liked Vermeer for his clarity and purpose, also enjoyed well-belauded detective stories.
Okay, so that's a whirlwind tour of objectivism as laid out in these sources. Metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, aesthetics.
A comprehensive system, and as you can imagine, a system that generated and still generates a lot of controversy and criticism.
Absolutely. The sources acknowledge this. She was criticized from all sides, academics, media, politicians on the left and the right.
Yeah, the sources mention conservatives sometimes viewed her as problematic too, perhaps for the atheism or the radical capitalism.
So importantly, the materials you provided also address some specific criticisms head-on, using her own philosophy as the basis for the response. Let's walk through a few of those presented in the sources.
Okay. A common one is about her personal life, specifically her relationship with Nathaniel Brandon.
The criticism being that she, while married to Frank O'Connor, had an affair with Brandon, who was also married at the time.
Right. The source's response emphasizes one key detail. The relationship allegedly began with the knowledge and consent of both their spouses, Frank O'Connor and Barbara Brandon.
Consent being the key factor there.
According to this perspective, yes. The ethical breach, as presented in the sources, came later when Brandon became involved with another woman secretly, being dishonest with both Rand and his own wife. Rand discovered this deception and ended the relationship. So the sources frame the ending not as hypocrisy about the affair itself, but as a consequence of dishonesty, reinforcing her commitment to honesty and integrity within her ethical framework.
Interesting framing. Okay, another big one. Accepting Social Security payments later in life. How could a champion of self-reliance and minimal government do that?
The source's argument here is pretty direct. She had been forced to pay into the Social Security system via taxes her entire working life in America.
So it wasn't a handout.
Not in this view. It was seen as simply reclaiming a small portion of her own money that had been coercively taken. The sources argue it would actually have been immoral by her standards, an act of self-sacrifice to refuse the payments, essentially letting the government keep funds that were rightfully hers, taken under a system she opposed. It was restitution, not welfare.
Okay. What about her involvement with HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, the McCarthy-era stuff?
The critique is she participated in what many see as a political witch hunt against communists in Hollywood.
How do the sources explain her role?
They specify her testimony was quite narrow. She primarily criticized American films, like one called Songs of Russia, for portraying the Soviet Union in a falsely positive light.
Based on her own experience.
Exactly. Having lived under and fled that regime, she felt strongly about misrepresentations that ignored its brutality. The sources note this was during World War II, when the US and Soviets were allies against the Nazis, which adds context. But they stressed her opposition wasn't just anti-communist, it was anti-collectivist across the board. She saw communism and fascism as related evils, and as mentioned, even criticized conservatives for what she saw as reliance on mysticism instead of reason.
One more, the criticism that her fictional characters like Rourke or Galt are unrealistic, just caricatures.
Yeah, that they're too black and white, not like real complex people.
The source's defense.
They argue it's an intentional artistic choice. Like a political cartoonist exaggerating features to make a point clearer, Rand used idealized characters to starkly embody certain values or flaws.
To illustrate the philosophy.
Precisely. They're meant to demonstrate principles in action, representing good and evil, rationality and irrationality, in a very clear way for the reader. The sources emphasize that while the characters might be stylized, the moral principles they represent are intended to be practical and applicable in the real world. A true moral code, they argue, has to be livable.
So looking back at her whole story through the lens of these particular sources, it's quite a narrative.
It really is. From escaping totalitarianism to achieving her vision in America, a journey the texts explicitly connect to her living by the virtues she preached.
And there's that recurring theme in the sources. Human progress comes from reason, from the mind.
And moving away from mysticism, whether it's religious or secular mysticism of muscle, the reliance on force.
The sources frame her as a heroine who escaped that world of witch doctors and Attilas, as they put it.
Yeah, representing the mystics of spirit and the mystics of force she saw embodied in Soviet Russia. Her fight, they emphasize, was intellectual, fought with her mind, her writing.
And her impact. Undeniable. The sources keep coming back to her influence as an author.
Mentioning that Library of Congress poll about Atlas Shrugged again, they present her work as genuinely changing people's lives.
So the final picture from these sources is Ayn Rand as a genius philosopher and heroine, someone who used her intellect to champion freedom, reason, and individual achievement.
That's definitely the perspective presented in the materials we've explored today. It's been a deep dive specifically into this collection of texts, her life, her complex philosophy of objectivism, and how these sources counter criticisms using her own framework.
We traced her journey from Russia, looked at how her novels developed her ideas, unpacked the 5 branches of objectivism, metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, aesthetics, and examined those source-based responses to major criticisms.
It's a lot to take in. Her ideas remain incredibly potent and challenging.
Definitely. And to leave you, our listener, with a final thought, this one's also drawn directly from the sources, a quote from Atlas Shrugged. "Don't let your flame die out with indifference. We can achieve the world we desire. It exists. It's real. It's possible. It's yours."
A very Randian call to action to end on.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Lots to think about there.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Deep Dive, exploring radical ideas, grounded in reality, driven by reason, built on self-esteem, rational self-interest, and laissez-faire capitalism, produced by Bob Rash.
We'll be back next week. Until then, stay curious, stay free, and enjoy music.
The Deep Dive by Bob Rash.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.